Once a nation held the world in its grasp. During the 16th century, it was not Britain that waved the flag of the greatest empire on earth. It was Spain. For the first time in history, a crown commanded a global empire that stretched from Europe to Africa and from the Americas to Asia. The territories under Spanish control were so extensive that people began to say, "The sun never sets on the Spanish Empire," a phrase that would later be borrowed by the British. Yet, here lies the irony. This wealthiest empire in history crumbled under the weight of its own riches. The significance of this collapse is straightforward. More often than not, we confuse sudden influxes of money with genuine wealth, and the ensuing downfall is invariably catastrophic. Upon arriving in the New World after 1492, Spain stumbled upon what seemed to be an endless jackpot. Streams of gold and silver arrived in quantities unimaginable to any European kingdom. The conquest of Mexico in 1521 toppled the Aztec Empire and granted Spain access to the bountiful mines of Zacatecas. Just 10 years later, following the conquest of Peru, Spain dismantled the Inca Empire and unlocked Potasius Mountain of Silver, a mine so massive it earned the moniker, the mountain that devours men. For over a century, this treasure trove fueled fleets of ships laden with riches as they crossed the Atlantic Ocean. Italian traders, Dutch merchants, and German craftsmen flourished by selling luxury goods to Spain, goods that were paid for with American silver. Meanwhile, domestic industries languished without investment or support. Why bother establishing factories or developing trade networks when one could simply wait for treasure ships to arrive? As a result, Spain evolved into a consumer-driven economy rather than a producer, the very opposite trajectory taken by its rivals who diligently reinvested every coin they could acquire through various means. In addition to these economic missteps, Spanish monarchs engaged in extravagant military campaigns that consumed staggering amounts of wealth. They burned through resources in relentless warfare rather than fostering growth within their own borders or considering long-term strategies for stability and prosperity. This reckless approach ultimately contributed to an unstable economy where riches turned from being assets into liabilities for both the crown and its people alike. The Habsburg dynasty regarded itself as the staunch defender of Catholicism in the turbulent aftermath of the Reformation, a role that came with an astronomical price. The vast riches extracted from the mines of Mexico and Peru not only financed military campaigns against the Ottoman Turks but also sustained armies aimed at quelling the Dutch revolt, all while keeping Spain embroiled in the French wars of religion. Enormous sums were funneled into the 30 Years' War, one of history's bloodiest conflicts, where Catholic and Protestant states clashed fiercely across Europe. Even the notorious Spanish Armada of 1588, a massive fleet dispatched to subdue Protestant England, was largely funded by silver from the New World. When this ambitious naval endeavor ultimately failed, it resulted in catastrophic financial repercussions for Spain. So where did all that gold and silver end up? They found their way to battlefields, ships, and insurmountable debt. Spain was not merely spending what arrived. It was borrowing against treasure that had yet to reach its shores. Prominent banking families from Germany, such as the Fugger dynasty, along with later financiers from Genoa, provided substantial loans to the Spanish crown, secured by anticipated shipments of silver. In theory, this strategy appeared brilliant. The Potosí mines would ensure a perpetual flow of wealth. However, in practice, it proved to be a reckless gamble. A single fleet could be delayed by storms or lost to enemy interception on the high seas, leading Spain into default, a scenario it faced repeatedly. In fact, during just the 16th century alone, defaults occurred 4 times. In 1557, 1575, 1596, and 1607. Imagine being hailed as the wealthiest empire on earth yet declaring bankruptcy every 20 years. That was the sobering reality for Spain. In this precarious economic landscape thrived pirates who were not mere opportunistic marauders but rather strategic instruments of economic warfare. Both England and the Netherlands grasped that attacking treasure fleets did more than simply seize gold bars. It dismantled Spain's credit system. Sir Francis Drake, operating under royal endorsement from Queen Elizabeth I, circumnavigated the globe in the 1580s while plundering Spanish galleons and returning home with treasures valued at half of England's annual revenue. Meanwhile, Piet Hein, a Dutch privateer renowned for his audacity, managed to capture an entire Spanish treasure fleet off Cuba's coast in 1628, an astonishing haul worth 11 million guilders in silver. This singular achievement nearly sent Spanish finances crashing down once again. Every fleet lost at sea represented far more than just a misfortune during maritime travel. It signified a real-time sovereign default that reverberated through Europe's financial systems. The stakes were incredibly high as each loss brought with it a ripple effect that threatened to destabilize not only Spain's economy but also its position on the world stage as a dominant power. As these events unfolded throughout this tumultuous period in history, they painted a vivid picture of how intertwined fate and fortune could be amidst political ambition and relentless conflict. Spain had essentially mortgaged its future wealth, and whenever pirates or storms disrupted trade routes, creditors from across Europe were left unpaid. Meanwhile, nations such as England and the Netherlands reinvested the stolen silver into formidable fleets, banks, and commercial enterprises, laying down the groundwork for their burgeoning empires. What was once a lifeline for Spain had morphed into its Achilles heel. The Spanish rulers had a golden opportunity to transform the influx of precious metals into a sustainable economy. They could have focused on developing local industries, nurturing innovation, or establishing a tax system that ensured a fair distribution of wealth among their populace. Instead, they treated silver as an endless resource, leading the crown to fall victim to one of the most perilous traps: an addiction to debt. From the mid-16th century onward, Spanish monarchs found themselves in deep financial waters as they accrued significant debts in exchange for anticipated treasure shipments. German banking dynasties like the Fugger family and later the Genoese offered substantial loans in return for stakes in upcoming fleets filled with riches. This was nothing short of a high-stakes financial gamble. Gold ingots poured into Seville, debts were settled, and the cycle continued unabated. However, there was a critical flaw in this precarious system. If silver did not arrive as expected, Spain would face inevitable defaults. Unfortunately for Spain, defaults became alarmingly frequent. The empire declared bankruptcy 4 times within just 50 years, first in 1557, then again in 1575, followed by further collapses in 1596 and 1607. Imagine the richest empire on earth, boasting more treasures than any other kingdom throughout history, repeatedly informing its creditors that it simply could not pay its dues. Between 1500 and 1650, Spain imported around 180,000 tons of silver and 2,000 tons of gold into its coffers. To provide context, this amount exceeds all the silver extracted by Europe during the previous millennium combined. This influx of wealth did not merely transform Europe. It had profound effects on global trade dynamics as well. Spanish galleons departed from ports like Seville and Cadiz, transporting bars of gold eastward to the Mediterranean, northward to the Netherlands, and westward across the Pacific to Manila, where silver was exchanged for exquisite Chinese silk and fine porcelain. One major contributing factor to this financial turmoil was war. The Habsburg monarchs of Spain saw themselves not merely as rulers but as champions of Catholic orthodoxy amidst the Protestant Reformation. This lofty mission came at an exorbitant cost. American silver financed military campaigns against the Ottoman Empire in the Mediterranean, brutally suppressed revolts like the Dutch Revolt, and engaged in conflicts against Protestant England. The infamous Spanish Armada of 1588 alone consumed millions of ducats, an amount equivalent to billions today, and when it ultimately failed, Spain suffered not just a military setback but an immense financial blow as well. Despite these losses, wars continued unabated. The 30 Years' War ravaged Europe from 1618 to 1648 and depleted Spain's treasury at an alarming pace. Ironically enough, despite being awash in wealth from overseas treasures, much of that money seldom remained within Spanish borders. Gold ingots flowed through Spanish hands like water through a sieve, leaving little behind to fortify the very nation that had been blessed with such abundant resources. Italian shipbuilders, Flemish traders, and German bankers thrived on silver transactions, significantly enriching their respective economies, while simultaneously undermining Spain's financial stability. Spain became primarily a consumer, relying heavily on external production. With each new fleet arriving in Seville, foreign creditors reaped significant rewards, which systematically weakened Spanish industries. The reliance on imports and foreign loans effectively immobilized the national economy, plunging the crown into a state of dependence that proved detrimental in the long run. Then came the pirates. The treasure fleets represented not only Spain's lifeline but also an obvious target for marauders. These convoys carried what were essentially the salaries of the empire, vast shipments of silver sourced from Veracruz or Havana, destined for Seville's bustling port. Losing one of these fleets was far more than just a minor inconvenience. It spelled disaster for the nation's finances. In 1628, the Dutch privateer Piet Hein successfully seized an entire treasure fleet off the coast of Cuba, valued at over 11 million florins. This singular act devastated Spain's credit and shattered confidence in its ability to repay debts. English corsairs like Francis Drake and John Hawkins, operating under royal sanction from Queen Elizabeth herself, transformed piracy into a state-sponsored endeavor. Every galleon captured by English or Dutch privateers was not merely a prize. It represented an economic warfare strategy aimed at crippling Spain's financial resources. England and the Netherlands reinvested these plundered riches into powerful navies, robust banking systems, and flourishing trade companies. The very foundation of Spain's economic stability was being redirected into strengthening the empires of its adversaries. This over-reliance on treasure fleets rendered Spain exceptionally vulnerable to external threats. Meanwhile, other emerging powers such as England and the Dutch Republic diversified their wealth across expansive trade networks, agriculture, and eventually industrial ventures. In stark contrast, Spain had placed all its bets on gold and silver shipments. When a fleet arrived safely in port, debts would be settled promptly, and life would go on as usual for the crown. However, when a fleet was lost to piracy or misfortune, Spain found itself engulfed in crises, facing defaults or resorting to desperate loans to stay afloat. The pirates did not merely steal gold. They dismantled vital elements of the Spanish Empire's foundation brick by brick. At the dawn of the 17th century, Spain still appeared formidable on maps across Europe. Its empire sprawled across vast oceans. Kings resided in lavish palaces adorned with treasures from distant lands. Grand cathedrals brimmed with artifacts brought back from the Americas. Nevertheless, beneath this facade of power lay a financially drained empire struggling to sustain itself. Inflation steadily eroded national prosperity, while mounting debt shackled the crown to foreign bankers who held significant influence over its fiscal policies. The rampant piracy that plagued Spanish waters transformed its most significant asset, the treasure fleets, into its most profound vulnerability. As time marched forward and challenges mounted against it from various fronts, Spain grappled with an undeniable truth. Without reforming its economic strategies and breaking free from dependence on fleeting treasures, it risked losing everything it had built over centuries of conquest and exploration. For the average Spaniard, the notion of wealth was merely an illusion. Prices surged relentlessly, wages stagnated, and taxes climbed higher to fund wars that seemed interminable. The once mighty empire, renowned as the richest in the world, began to consume itself from within. As Spain staggered under the burden of its own treasures, other nations observed quietly, learning from its missteps. The English, Dutch, and later the French understood a crucial lesson. Gold alone does not forge a lasting empire. The Spanish system leaned heavily on extraction. Mines filled with precious metals, hefty tributes from colonies, and treasure fleets sailing across treacherous waters. These colonies in the Americas were designed solely to funnel wealth back to Spain rather than cultivate prosperous economies of their own. It represented a model of plunder rather than sustainable production. This marked the dawn of a truly global economy with Spain at its epicenter. For contemporary Americans, this revelation may come as a surprise. When Jamestown, the first permanent English colony, was established in 1607, a mere marsh fighting for survival, Mexico City already boasted universities, printing presses, and grand cathedrals. Lima flourished as a bustling metropolis filled with commerce and culture. Furthermore, St. Augustine in Florida was founded by Spain in 1565. It stands as the first enduring European settlement within what is now considered United States territory, 4 decades before Jamestown ever came into existence. In stark contrast, Great Britain pursued a different colonial strategy that fostered enduring economic value. North America may not have been rich in gold or silver, but it produced crops like tobacco and sugar, along with timber and eventually cotton, resources that fueled both industry and trade. Rather than relying on treasure fleets laden with silver and gold, Britain established chartered companies such as the British East India Company and nurtured sophisticated banking institutions in London. Dutch merchants pioneered innovations by founding the Amsterdam Stock Exchange and transforming their naval forces into instruments of global trade dominance. These rivals were proactive. They did not wait idly for riches to arrive but created systems capable of generating wealth continuously. When they captured Spanish silver through piracy or trade agreements, they reinvested those gains wisely, enhancing their power while Spain gradually depleted its resources. This distinction is vital to understanding the broader historical context. Spain gauged its wealth through tangible treasures, gold coins and silver ingots, while Great Britain and Holland evaluated their fortunes based on robust systems that facilitated growth and replication. One approach was finite. It had limits dictated by resource availability. The other bore infinite potential for expansion. History has demonstrated which model endures over time. By the mid-17th century, Spain's decline was evident for all to see. The once feared Armada had become a mere shadow of its former glory. Rampant inflation coupled with repeated bankruptcies eroded faith in the crown's stability. The 30 Years' War drained Spain's coffers significantly while paving the way for Dutch independence, allowing the Republic to establish a thriving commercial empire. Simultaneously, England's naval strength grew alongside advancements in its banking sector, creating a formidable economic force on the world stage. While Spain retained vast territories scattered across various continents, it lacked the financial resources necessary to defend or develop them effectively. By the 18th century, what had been an empire that once instilled fear throughout Europe had transformed into a decaying giant struggling to maintain relevance. Yet, this narrative surrounding Spain's downfall transcends mere discussions of monarchs or pirates. It encapsulates a deeper theme, the illusion of wealth itself. This story serves as a reminder that true prosperity lies not in accumulation but in sustainable development and strategic foresight that can withstand the test of time and changing circumstances. When torrents of wealth flood in, whether from mines, loans, or modern printing presses, the temptation remains constant. To spend it, use it as collateral for further borrowing, or squander it on wars and extravagances. However, without strict discipline and investments aimed at boosting genuine productivity, money can eat away at the very foundations of society. This lesson was harshly learned by Spanish peasants who witnessed the relentless influx of silver into Seville, only to experience skyrocketing bread prices that placed this essential commodity beyond their reach. In contemporary times, savers are confronting a similar plight as inflation steadily erodes their wages and purchasing power, even while governments insist that the economy is robust. Although the mechanisms at play may differ from those of the past, the suffering remains eerily familiar. The pirate incursions of the 17th century resonate with modern echoes. The Spanish treasure fleets were particularly vulnerable because they amassed great wealth in singular, colossal shipments, making them easy targets for marauders. Today's economies mirror this vulnerability by concentrating wealth within fragile financial systems, encompassing institutions deemed too big to fail or debt markets balanced precariously on shaky trust. When disaster strikes, whether a ship sinks or a bank collapses, the repercussions ripple outward, threatening defaults and triggering crises across interconnected networks. The losses endured by Spain at the hands of Piet Hein in 1628 bear striking similarities to today's financial turmoil. Both events have laid bare the weaknesses inherent within entire systems. The lesson drawn from these historical narratives is both harsh and unmistakable. Treasure does not equate to true wealth. Silver cannot guarantee security. Genuine prosperity arises from sustainable systems that create value over time through investments in product. The intricate web woven by Spanish exploration and conquest laid down foundations for modern economic structures, while simultaneously fostering cultural exchanges that shape societies across continents. The legacy left by these historical events continues to resonate today as we navigate our interconnected world. The rise and fall of empires serve as powerful reminders that wealth can be both a blessing and a curse, one that can lead to prosperity or pave the way for inevitable decline if not managed wisely. Rival nations grasped the complexities woven into this intricate game and inherited a more promising future as a result. While history may not repeat itself verbatim, its rhythms are challenging to overlook. The world's most affluent empire crumbled because it confused mere treasure with authentic wealth. Any society that commits the same blunder, flooding its economy with money while undermining its foundational structures, will inevitably tread down a similar path of decline. The pressing question is not whether history will revisit these patterns, but whether we will recognize the warning signs in time to avert disaster. If this exploration has provided you with fresh insights into our economic landscape, consider how historical lessons can guide us toward wiser decisions moving forward. History holds invaluable answers. It is up to us to discern where they lie hidden amidst the pages of time. Spain was not merely at the forefront of global affairs. It was actively constructing a vast infrastructure while Great Britain and France struggled with their own faltering colonies. However, this empire, buoyed by an influx of precious metal, was fundamentally hollow at its core. The Spanish mistakenly equated treasure with true wealth, believing that the abundance of silver would translate into prosperity. While the silver itself was tangible, the manner in which it was utilized transformed strength into vulnerability. Between the years 1500 and 1600, inflation in Spain spiraled out of control, quadrupling within a century. Ordinary Spaniards found it increasingly challenging to afford basic necessities such as bread and clothing, even as their nation sat atop mountains of silver. The question arises, why did this occur? The answer lies in the fundamental principle that money holds value only when it remains sufficiently scarce to be perceived as reliable. Imagine a small town where a loaf of bread costs a single coin. Suddenly, an influx occurs, bringing 10 times more coins into circulation, yet the number of bakers and loaves remains unchanged. Recognizing that people now possess greater quantities of currency, bakers begin to raise their prices. Before long, the cost of bread increases to 2, 3, or even 4 coins, not due to an improvement in quality but because the value of each coin has diminished. This scenario epitomizes Spain's economic plight during this era. Economists refer to this phenomenon as the price revolution, an unprecedented wave of global inflation triggered by an oversupply of silver chasing too few goods. Yet, not everyone felt the effects of inflation uniformly. The elites, nobles, merchants, and bankers, who were first to gain access to the newly acquired silver, reaped substantial benefits before prices adjusted to reflect reality. In contrast, ordinary citizens who relied on fixed wages found themselves falling further behind economically. The irony of this situation was particularly harsh. As Spain brought in more silver than ever before, its average citizens felt increasingly impoverished. What should have been a windfall turned into a toxic burden. The miscalculations extended deeper than mere economics. Rather than channeling their newfound wealth into productive industries or sustainable ventures, Spain squandered its fortune on imports.